Hello everybody. In this video, I am going to give you probably at least another 20% of performance out of your computer. Imagine that without you spending a single penny, because there are so many different ways you can optimize your system to give you that little bit of extra headroom. Because let's face it, however much computing power you have, however many gigabytes of RAM you have installed in your machine, you always want more, don't you? And I'm going to show you how to get it. Today, we're going to be looking at tweaks you can do on both a Mac and a PC using both Cubase and Logic. So whatever your system, I bet I'll have something of use for you. Even if you're not a Logic or Cubase user, quite a lot of these things are more to do with workflow than the actual sort of intricacies under the bonnet of your computer. And so it'll be of value to you as well. Okay. Now, let's first of all talk about what are we talking about when we're talking about computer performance. The two things that's four. The two things that really matter to most musicians are computing power, processing power, which I refer to as CPU, and memory, or RAM. And if you are if you mix a lot of music and you have tons and tons of plugins, or you use lots and lots of virtual synths, then it is more than likely you're going to run out of processing power, CPU, before you run out of memory. If you have an enormous orchestral template with thousands of tracks, with strings and woodwinds and everything else, it's quite likely you're going to run out of memory before you run out of processing power. So we're going to be talking about optimizing your workflow for both of those things. Yes, it's that good. Okay. The first thing we need to do, though, is to work out how to monitor how your system's actually working. Because it's all very well just sort of playing away and then sort of suddenly going, I'm hearing crackles and pops. And those are the sort of things you'll hear when you run out of processing power. Okay, first of all, on the Mac, if you go Shift-Command-U, it brings up the Utilities folder. You then choose Activity Monitor, double-click on it, and it will show you, as you probably know, because I suspect you've all been here before, how your processing is going, how you can see nice little diagrams right, left, and center. It's actually most useful for system memory. And I'll explain why it's more useful for system memory than it is for processing power in a moment. But that tells you that you've got tons and tons of memory at the moment because we're not using very much.
Meanwhile, here on my PC, if you right-click right down the bottom there on the taskbar, and then you click on Task Manager, you get all the detail you could possibly want. There you go. Look, it'll give you overall summary of your performance. It'll give you the processing. It'll give you memory. It'll give you everything. There you go.
Now, processing power is better looked at within the individual DAW itself because it's a measure of how the DAW is managing. And a lot of that is not to do with the overall CPU. It's to do with real-time performance. And that is a different thing. In Cubase, you go to Studio, drop down, Audio Performance, and it tells you there, that all-important real-time performance there. It's another thing called ASIO Guard there, and it gives you peaks on any one chord there. And if this thing here goes red, processing overload, that's when you start hearing clicks and pops. So we're going to work very hard not to let that happen. Right. Hello, Logic. Okay, now Logic, if you want to see the audio performance meter up all the time, go to the this little bit up here. Click this arrow here. Go to Custom, and then mysteriously up on the right-hand side, you'll see CPU. So what it's going to give you is that top one is processing, and that bottom one is how fast things are going on and off your hard drive, which is really useful. So those are two things which this is how we're going to keep an eye on things. What will happen if you overload either of these systems, you get big warnings come up and says, you have transgressed, you have run out of CPU, or something like that. Right, the first and most obvious thing, if you live in a big house, do you leave all the lights on in all the rooms all the time? No, you don't. And so why, if you have a big template with, say, 100 tracks in it, do you leave all the tracks enabled all the time when actually you're not going to be using them? So the most obvious thing to do is disable tracks which you're not using. Okay. Now let's start with Cubase is fairly straightforward. You go into if you select the track like that, control click the track, and what you want is disable track, that down there, and then it'll all go grey. And as soon as you disable it, you're freeing up both the memory and the processing power. Now, if we go into Logic, it is a little less obvious sometimes, because at the moment, if you look at this, there's no obvious way of turning off these tracks. What you have to do is go Control, oh no, it's not Control T, it's Option T. There we go. And it brings up the track header options. Now you can see some things are not being shown. So you go Option T, we want to see the on and off button. And so we'll do that. Now each track has an on and off button. So if you want to disable the track, you can just do that. And every time you turn the thing off, you're freeing up all the processing power. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. There's no real sort of magic about that. But if you use that cleverly, you can run a really big session, but you're only actually using, one or two things at the same time. Right, point number 2 is about what are called bouncing and freezing tracks. Now, in general, a virtual instrument or a plugin or something like that is going to use massively more processing power than an audio track. An ordinary audio track uses almost nothing. So one of the techniques which is built into a lot of these DAWs is ways of turning virtual instruments into audio tracks. And there's a couple of ways of doing that. So if we look first of all at Cubase, let's just put something in. Let's just, because there's nothing in there at the moment, is there? No. I think it's playing both Logic and Cubase at the same time. Yep, it certainly is. Okay, there we go. So let's get rid of that. Right, so there we have an intriguing little thing on the Pro 5. So let's, there's a couple of ways of dealing with this. One is to simply render it in place. If you go Control and click, it brings up this menu, render in place, render with current settings, and it now turns it into a piece of audio. The advantage of this is you've now got a piece of audio which you can edit, move around, duplicate, whatever else. Although it mutes the track here, it has not disabled it. It's still active. So what you need to do is go in there and disable the track, and now you save the CPU. There's a quicker and easier way of doing that, but it also has slight disadvantages as well, and I'll show you how that works. So if we undo that, I didn't mean to do that. Come back. Ugh. Okay. Right. So this time I'm going to play a little piece in, which is going to be even more exciting. I lied. It was no more exciting than the first one. Okay. Right. The other way of doing this is freezing. And what freezing does is it turns a virtual instrument into an audio file, but behind the scenes. So in Cubase, you go here and you click this little button there, and now freeze instruments only, yes please, and you can control all kinds of bits and pieces, which I'll leave you to go off and experiment by yourself and learn. And there you go, now it is frozen. What you can't do, it still sounds the same, but what you can't do is edit it. If you want to edit it, you've got to unfreeze it, and that means re-clicking that, okay? Unfreeze, there we go. Right, Logic does exactly the same thing. So with our, here we go, let's get rid of some of these tracks here. Delete track. Yes, I want you to go away. Okay, let's disable make sure we're not recording in there as well. It's so weird running two. Okay, here we go. Okay, that'll do. Right, let's record some epic music. That'll do. Right, okay. Two things we can do here. We can bounce it in place, which turns it into an audio file, which is Control B. Yep, we'll have one of those, thanks. And it puts it on a new track for you. And then you can just disable that track, and then you've saved all that CPU. Or you can just turn that off. Or you can, indeed, let's unmute it. You can freeze it. Now, but there's no little freezy button. So once again, we have to go Option T to the track header, okay? There. Do you see there? We need to enable that so you can see the little freezy thing come up, okay? Click the freezy button, and as soon as you go to play it, it does the freezy thing like that. Now, although it looks the same and sounds the same, if you go in to try and edit it, it won't do it until it unfreezes. There, you see what I mean? Comes up and says, do you want to unfreeze me? And I say, yeah, I want to unfreeze you. And then it's frozen. So it's a really quick and easy way of saving processing power, memory, whatever else. So those two things, balancing in place and freezing, are super important on both Macs and PCs and any DAW which you may be using. Now, there's other stuff which you can also do with this, which is super cool. So if you wanted, for example, to add lots of plugins, this is another way where you can burn through your processing power. It's really tempting. Oh yeah, just gonna throw loads of them in the. I'll get the mixer up and I'll put loads of plugins on this track. I'll have hundreds and hundreds of them. Compressors and guitars and Christ knows what else. Anyway, that's not always the most effective way of doing it. So if you don't want to add hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of plugins to your track, Control-click the thing itself and go to selection-based processing. Or you can do, Option-Shift-P. That will do. There we go. And what this allows you to do is to apply a plugin to that track any old way you like. Doesn't really matter what it is. Any old thing. Let's do that. I don't mind what it is. I don't even know what this plugin is. Goodness knows what it's going to sound like. Okay, apply, and then it's done it. That's it. Actually, it didn't do very much, did it? But that's the idea. Selection-based plugging, it's an offline process rather than an online one, which uses up CPU. In Cubase, there is I think, even cooler thing. If we, first of all, bounce this in place, let's go render in place, this little friend down here, up comes the audio. Now, once you do that, there's a really cool thing called direct offline processing. And it brings up this little thing here. And I'll show you the difference. I'll show you how much difference it makes. If we add something quite heavy hitting like Guitar Rig, it's really, really good, Guitar Rig, but it's quite heavy on the old processing. Okay, put one of those in. Right, and now let's just do the same. Okay, let's bring up our, where's our audio performance, just so you can see how these ramps up as I copy a few of those down. So 2 of those, whoop, look, it's gone up again. 3 of those, whoop, a bit more. 4 of those, whoa, 5 of those. Okay, so 5 of those, and the old ASIO guard thing is there right up at 50%. Right, now let's just take those off. Okay, now let's add it. Let's add Guitar Rig through the direct offline processing. See if it's any better. I know it's going to be better, or I wouldn't have said it. Okay, up comes direct offline processing. It puts it in there. And ding, there we go. So and that's got the same thing up. So that's 1. Let's get the second one up. 2, absolutely no impact so far. 3. Do you see what I mean? Look, we're adding all these, but last time we were doing this, it was climbing up with every one which we're putting on. This time it's not making any difference. The reason is because it's processing it offline. In other words, it's not doing real-time processing. It's going, okay, I'll go away, work it out once, and then that's done. So it's not actually hitting your CPU in anything like the same way. Now that's extremely cool because it's still, that's going to sound a bit. Yeah, man. Okay, so metal freak fiends can really get their stuff together. Now what, made it all go away. Okay, there we go. Oh, that's better. Right. What you can then do is you go to make direct offline processing permanent. And if you do that, it'll just write it to disk, and that will be that. How cool is that? So these are 2 ways in both Logic and Cubase, which you can massively reduce the amount of processing power you need by using non-real-time processing, because it'll just save your computer will love you. It'll say, thank you, Guy, or We won't say thank you, Guy. It'll say whatever your name is. Right. Okay. Let's go under the bonnet a bit, because a lot of the savings to be made are to be made through adjusting the audio settings. That's what we're looking at now. Just before we go any further, it's quite important that I tell you about this. Oh, there. How exciting is that? If you want to know more about that, there's details underneath this video. Come and have a chat with us and we can tell you how we can improve your chances of success. Okay, right, moving on. So the way it works is this. If you go into, let's start with Cubase, open up Studio Setup, go into whatever your sound card is, open the control panel. Now, this thing, buffer size here, this is crucial. It makes all the difference. The smaller the buffer size, the more strain it's going to put on your processor. And the more clicks and pops you'll get quicker. If you have a bigger buffer size, it gives it a lot more leeway and it reduces the pressure on your processing power, on your processor. Oh, great. So you say, so why am I using 256? Why don't I just use 2048 all the time? The reason is that buffer size also includes what's called latency, the length of time between when you hit a key and when you hear the sound. Now, if it goes much above 256, a lot of people find that quite uncomfortable because they're going, and it just gets in the way of the way you play your instrument. So a lot of people feel 256, possibly 128 is the sweet spot. I often go higher than that. I can bear to 512, but that is a primary function of the amount of CPU which your computer is going to use. So if you change nothing else and you've got clicks and pops going on, change that. The other thing is, if you're not actually playing in real time, if you're just mixing, there's no reason why you can't have a much higher buffer setting, because you're not going to suffer half any of these kind of latency issues. So you can actually whack it right up to mix and you can get away with having more plugins and things like that. That works whether you're on, obviously, a Mac or a PC, or whether you're in Logic. If you go here into Preferences, into Audio, up it'll come, and there is your I/O buffer setting there. And that's the same thing. So exactly the same thing there. So you can go in there and set that. There is other stuff you can do. Now, I always used to think, I suspect the nice people who, the developers who write programs like Logic, the default settings will be the most efficient. And there was a really good article, and I'll put a link in the description underneath because I can't quite remember where I found it, which said, no. Actually, if you want best possible performance, do this. And they say, okay, set processing threads not to automatic, but to however many you've got, the maximum number. So I've gone for 16. Processing buffer range, don't have medium or small, have large. Multi-threading, you can either have playback tracks or live tracks, depending on how you're working. But it's these two, 16 and large. And I thought, okay, and apply. And I did. And on a test rig, I got about 10, 15% more performance just by doing that. So it depends on it depends on your setup, it depends on lots of things. But if you haven't played with that, go and have a go. If it makes it worse, then turn it off. Okay. What I tend to do is I'll load up a particularly heavy hitting synth or something like that, see how many tracks I can run, change something, can I run more or less? And then I know pretty much out of the box whether my changes are making a difference for the good or the bad. There's a number of other things you can play with in advanced options. So audio system, advanced options, down you go. Now, activate multiprocessing. Yes, please. Absolutely. Activate ASIO-Guard. Absolutely. There's a number of things you can change down here. ASIO-Guard level, use this setting for the highest audio processing performance to play back many VST instruments. This leads to increased latency and memory usage. Do you see what they said there? Memory usage. So what is it? So many things to do with computer performance are a trade-off. If you reduce one, you're building up, you know what I mean? No, you don't, because I'm being incoherent. Okay, sometimes there's a lot of things which you use more memory, reduce the CPU, or you go back. So you're balancing the whole thing. This is why you need to monitor your system all the time. Okay, let's move on, because I think we've got under the weeds of all this. A couple of fairly simple things which you should be aware of, which you probably are. Some plugins use a lot more processing power than others, and one of the big ones is Reverb. And sometimes we see students come onto our courses and they say, I don't understand why I'm not getting better performance. And what they're doing is they're putting a reverb on each channel of their DAW. That's a really bad idea. You don't have to do that, and every instance of it is chewing up CPU. There's two types of reverb. Actually, I'll show you in Logic, because it's nice and simple in Logic. Or it's easier to illustrate in Logic. So what you need to do, first of all, is don't put reverb on individual channels. In Logic, we go to the mixer, we go to options, we create new auxiliary channel strip, and then we put our effect in there. So this one, I'm going to go into Space Designer. Here we go, Hello, Space Designer. Oh, nice to see you, Guy. You're not normally in Logic. No, I'm not. I just thought pop in and say hello. Right, so we've got two different types of reverb, synthesized and sampled. And it is as simple as that. The sampled reverb is the sample of a real room. They go in there and they go with a pitch sweep going played back through speakers, which they then, they do that and they re-record the sound of that sound in the room. And that gives a sort of fingerprint for what the sample, for what that space sounds like. And then you put it into a reverb like this, and every time you feed the signal in of you playing the piano or something, it simulates what it would sound like in the real room. Now that, as you can probably tell, uses quite a lot of processing power. So sampled reverb, or convolution reverb as it's known, things like altiverb and stuff like that, spaces from east-west, uses quite a lot of processing power. On the other hand, synthesized reverb, which is just an algorithm, also known as algorithmic reverb, uses very little CPU. So if you've got a choice between the two, and you're running on limited processing power, go for algorithmic. So things like Valhalla, for example, are algorithmic. Synthesized is good. Anyway, but there's lots of reasons you may want to use the sample one. So don't stick it on each track. Put it on an auxiliary bus and then use these bus sends. So here we go. So we're going to say the input for this is going to be bus 1, okay? And from this track, whichever one, weird track we've got going up here, the bounce in place one, shall we use that one? Yeah, why not? We go to the sends and we go to bus 1, and now we send it to bus 1. You know how to do that. You've seen this. You've been here before. Remember to turn it up or you won't hear anything. There you go. Now, the point is you can have loads and loads and loads of tracks all feeding to the same reverb and only using one instance of reverb. Exactly the same thing applies to every other DAW on the planet. You're using Bitwig, you say. Yes, it applies to you. Oh, Ableton Live? Yes, it does. And Reaper? Yes, all of those exactly the same. In Cubase, we go here, we create an effects track like that. We put a reverb on, cinematic rooms, there we go, add track, and exactly the same thing applies. But something I should mention, when you do bus-based reverb like this, look for this little knob here, which goes dry-wet mix. If you're going to insert reverb on a bus, you want to turn it 100% wet. You don't want any of the dry signal in there, because then you're just going to send the dry signal from one of your tracks to the reverb, and you just want to hear reverb. You don't want to hear all that other shenanigans going on. So here we go. So in we go. We're going to send it to that. We turn it on. We turn it up. We're in business. Anyway, you get the gist. That's reverb. It's a big saver if you're one of those who, and there's quite a lot of people out there go, oh, I didn't know that. Okay, and it's a real game changer when all that CPU I've been wasting over the years. What am I doing? Okay, we haven't looked very much at memory, but memory is the next thing we're looking at, and it's a big one for orchestral musicians in particular. Oh, yes, like you, Dave, in California, like you, Cynthia, in Singapore, Barry in Brazil. Alliteration? No, not necessary. Right. Okay, let's get this up. Okay, if we take Contact, for example, here is Spitfire Symphonic Strings Ensemble Patch. It is using 0.57 gigabytes, half a gigabyte. Okay, that's quite a lot. And if we start using multiple mic positions, it's going to go up a lot. There you go. Now it's suddenly loading a whole load more. So every mic position you add is going to add another load of memory. So now we're up to 1 gigabyte and counting. Oh my Lord. Okay. So if you have lots and lots and lots of these instruments, you're going to run out of memory very, very quickly. What you need to do is, the way samples work is Contact or any other sample player loads a little bit of the sample into its memory. I pointed to my head. Really, Guy? Okay, into its memory. So as soon as you hit the key, it starts playing it back. And then within a very short space of time, I say, okay, I know what he wants now. So it goes onto the SSD or onto the drive, and it starts madly collecting the next bit. So it's kind of shoveling the sound out just in time. What you can do, because it's loading something into memory, if you reduce the amount it loads into memory, called the sample buffer, you massively reduce the amount of memory which you need to run the sample. There's two ways of doing this, depending on what your sample player is. In Contact, there is a magical button called, oh, no, sorry, not that one. Go away, please. Hang on, here we go, right. Global Purge. Sounds a little bit kind of dodgy, doesn't it? Okay, look, we're now using 1.7 gigabytes. Let's try globally purging this. Purge all samples. None! How good is that? Now, as you play, what it's doing is dragging those samples off the SSD, wherever that is, in real time. So it's not preloading anything, or it's preloading hardly anything. So all the memory it's going to use is the stuff you actually play. So it will start to creep up, but basically you're going to get away with almost nothing. And that's super duper. In other instruments which don't have a purge function, you will find a sample buffer. And this applies to, East West Opus has a purge button. Sign doesn't. I think you have to set the sample buffer in there. Vienna Symphonic Library, you set the sample buffer. And what you do is you just bring the sample buffer down as low as possible, and you will massively reduce the amount of memory you're using. And that's really, really great news. Until it starts making clicks and pops and bangs and things. Because what you're doing is you're transferring the weight of this from memory to processing, because getting this stuff from the SSD instantly is very processor intensive. So again, it's this balancing thing I was going on about before, where you can't, okay, there's no such thing as a free lunch. You don't want to use so much memory, you're going to have to use a bit more CPU. So again, it's about maintaining a balance. And for this to work properly, you're going to have to make sure that your samples are all on really fast solid state drives. These little things, which I won't play with right now. So look, those are the main things you can do to try and maximize your system. The actual system itself, sometimes on the computer itself, On some computers, like on PCs, there is on Windows 10, there's a thing where you can go into super extra high power mode, where actually the whole thing will use more power and give you better overall system performance.
And to maximize your performance on a PC, this is a Windows PC, a Xeon, go to Settings, go to System, within System, go to Power and Sleep. Now, this is where it gets interesting. So you want to go to Additional Power Settings. They don't make it easy, do they? Look, and here you will get a choice. You can have balanced, or you can have ultimate performance. Of course we want ultimate performance. You can even dig into this in more detail and change some of the stuff. But basically what this does is to make sure that your PC is running, look, minimum performance 100%. So in other words, it's not going to faff about. So that will give you the best performance from your machine.
On a Mac, it depends on the Mac you're on. On the new M1 Max chips, there's a sort of enhanced mode where you can turn things up a bit. So you may well find within your whole computer, there's a way of making the whole computer run faster. There's also on PCs all kinds of complicated things like overclocking, but that's a completely different thing. And you really need to know what you're up to because you can make your whole system very unstable. Again, there's a trade-off between speed and stability. The one last thing I'd say is if you've got a big fast machine and it's not really performing the way you hope, there's more to the speed of your machine than just the benchmark figures you read on websites. What you may well need to do, because it's about real-time performance, not just CPU, and there's an excellent video about the real detailed explanation of how that works. Again, I'll put it in the link below. But it doesn't necessarily give you a solution. It just explains why looking at a benchmark won't tell you why this is going to work really well for audio. So, but what the answer is, you have to look at other things like your audio card, like your video card, all kinds of other bits and pieces, which might tangentially have a really severe effect on how well your computer's running. So you may need, if you've got a real problem, you may need to swap some of those things around before you go out and buy a new computer. But look, that's all I've got for you for today. I really hope that helps give you a bit more room for maneuver and you get a bit more fun out of writing music as a consequence, or you get less stressed. You can see I pulled all my hair out many years ago dealing with all this kind of stuff. But look, I'll be back very soon. If you've enjoyed this and found it useful, tell your friends, subscribe, put the little notification button on, and there's stuff to download underneath the video. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you very soon. Come back soon. Bye-bye.